What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole here. I'm joined by Clevta. TA. Should I go by TA? I say TA is how you logged on to here.
Yeah. Go ahead. That's not a problem. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm glad to have you on the pod. It's weird out there because we were kind of like riffing a little bit before we even got on here about how, there's a lot of people in the NFL media sphere. Many people who do stuff that's either directly or tangentially related to betting, I guess, predictions, other things like that. And I know maybe traditionally a way of sorting through the trying to find the signal from the noise, maybe to look at, betting records or things like that and this and that. Now, I personally just like listen to what people have to say and decide whether or not it sounds like bullshit, basically, or if it sounds like it actually makes some sense and it sounds like it has a sound methodology and things that I agree with. And you fall into the latter categories. That's why I wanted to have you on the pod.
I feel honored to. I passed the bullshit meter. That's pretty. It's a high accomplishment.
I should focus on the positive side rather than the negative side first. But no. you know what I mean. I mean, some of it is like obvious, right? Some of it is obvious, but there's also people who've become pretty good at like obfuscation here, where they throw out a bunch of numbers and other things like that, and then you still can't quite figure out what's going on here. So anyway. We're gonna talk through some of the process related stuff that you have, and right up top, I'll say everyone should go. I'll plug your website right up top here. So it's cleveanalytics.com. So CLEV analytics.com, and you have a free preview on here. Everyone should go and check that out. I think I posted it in the show notes, so it'll be there for everyone. But in talking about previewing the season, let's jump right into up top here. It's process related show. So obviously there's not necessarily a formulaic way of going about every offseason, how you look at the changes, how you look at predictions, how you look at what happened last season versus what's going to happen this season, all that sort of stuff. But how do you approach it when we have just way too much time, in particular, every single offseason, figuring out what to digest, what to throw aside, what to actually pay attention to when we're looking forward to an NFL season?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because a lot of people are doing similar things. You're looking at the same data sets and, a lot of the quote unquote regression, data points and, the fumble luck, turnover luck, all those sorts of things. And so, it's not easy, but, for me, it's just funny because no matter what we, how we evaluate things, it almost always comes down to just whatever happened at the end of last season is kind of how the consensus power ratings kick off 2024 the next season. So, it's not surprising that San Francisco, KC, Baltimore, and Detroit are kind of universally the four highest rated teams, I guess, coming into the season. And we know that's just not going to happen. It's the same thing on the downside. Carolina, New England are the worst teams, and kind of continuing off of last year. And so there's just no way that the same thing's going to happen year after year. So you have to kind of wade through some of that stuff and figure out kind of what matters. And I just start there. I look at what happened last year. It's not every team's record is, not every team is as good or as bad as their record. A lot of times there's a lot of underlying, hidden data points that you can try and glean something out of and see how real it was. And so I look back at, what happened last year. Were there any, major injuries? Did they develop, cluster injuries in the offensive line or in the secondary, whatever it might be? Were they relatively healthy? Who did they face from a quarterback perspective? A lot of times you get lucky. You get a lot of backup quarterbacks that you get to face versus, other teams in your division, for example. And so, things like that, along with, did you win a bunch of one-score games that you really didn't deserve? And also, a lot of people do, hey, here are what the one-score records look like. Maybe there's some regression one way or another, or, you're not going to win all those coin flips. But, all they do is they look at, all right, one score or less games, but they don't really dig into how they got to those one score games. So, there's a lot of times you get a backdoor touchdown or a backdoor field goal, or, you might be up multiple scores and then you kind of play prevent and the team comes back and gets to within a score. So you kind of have to wade through that stuff. And it's like, how much does that really matter? So, that's how I started. It's just kind of what happened last year. Was it a mirage? Was it real? How did you perform versus, your point differential, kind of your fourth quarter, win probability metrics, all those sorts of things. And then I look into, were there any coaching changes in the offseason? What are the personnel changes? What did that look like? Obviously, I key in on the premium positions. I care about quarterback, offensive line, receiver, secondary, pass rush. I don't really care about the linebacking core or really what happens in the run game, a lot of times. And so, take a look at those personnel changes and then, try to evaluate the potential schedule. I know it changes from year to year, but you could glean some things. I'm pretty sure that Kansas City is going to be really good, right? I'm pretty sure that San Francisco is going to be really good. Like you kind of know who the really good and really bad teams are for the most part. Everything in between is kind of it's kind of but in general, you can kind of get a sense of how difficult the schedule is from that perspective. And then what is are they playing some multiple tough games in a row? Do they have to play 5 or 6 games against playoff caliber teams in a row that could wear them down towards the end of the year? We saw that with the Eagles last year. So it's kind of all of that, into one. And, I really tend to focus on the teams, and we could talk about maybe some surprise teams if we want, but, I like focusing on kind of that dead zone team, those teams that are not horrible, but they're not playoff caliber per se. They're not the elite teams. I like those teams that are in the, win totals are like 6.5 to 7.5, right? Like the third quartile teams that no one's really talking about. Maybe they have a quarterback that is, not a retread or a guy that no one's really, talking about a lot, like a Baker Mayfield last year with Tampa or, Geno Smith with Seattle 2 years ago. But they have good rosters. And so I try to find those types of teams that I think can exceed expectations, because historically, that's where you find a lot of your surprise playoff teams. Pretty much every year in the last 25 seasons, a team in that 6.5 to 7.5 win total range makes the playoffs. Usually we see multiple teams. I think we saw 3 or 4 last year. So I like to swim in those waters to try to find diamonds in the rough when I look at kind of surprise teams. And then otherwise it's, you just kind of go team by team and break each one down. That's why the preview that I do, I spent almost 2 months working on. I get to that point. I go team by team and I find as many data points as I can to come up with opinions. And that's essentially how I go about kind of the full 32 team preview.
Okay, well let's break some of this down before we get into the individual names, which we'll get to. That's what the people want. Okay, the people want the names, of course, the teams, but I'll make them wait a little bit for that. So yeah, I think let me talk about a little bit what I've been doing belatedly as far as my process of looking at some of this. So of course we have like a power ranking type of formula based upon how the teams performed last year, which combines a lot of the stuff that you're talking about here at the beginning with, how lucky were they? How many one-score games were there? How many, these wins could have flipped to losses and vice versa if things had gone a little bit different? How much high variance stuff did they get? Stuff like that. Maybe not your traditional media power rankings of, finding a win-loss table, copying it into Excel and then sorting by wins, which are pretty much what you're still going to find, I think, as far as power rankings going into this season. So there's that differentiation, right? Like already just not even caring about like what happened this offseason. Then we have Kevin, the stuff that happened this offseason.
I was going to say, Kevin, the funny thing is you care, not to interrupt, I apologize, but like you talk about the media, like they don't want to look stupid, right? Like we don't care. Yeah. Like I don't care. I'll put my, neck out. I know you'll stick your neck out. These media, Dan Orlovsky's of the world, they're not going to say, oh, I think that, a team that's expected to win 6-7 games is going to make the playoff. Like it doesn't, to them, it's just not worth it. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I just think there is a little conflict there that if they sound stupid on ESPN, they may not come back the next year because they don't want to be wrong. So,
well, what's interesting about that is I get what you're saying with that. At the same time, I find that like not wanting to look stupid in a way it doesn't mean like maximizing your or minimizing your probability of something being wrong, because I feel like a lot of times that just means like going with whatever the vibes are for that particular time, sort of thing. I mean, if anything, I think it's boring sometimes where, if my power rankings are differing from media power rankings. In reality, like, I'm pretty close to what betting markets are saying. With there'll be a few teams that are off, and those guys are actually massively off of what betting markets are saying sometimes, which sets them up for being wrong, more often than not. But they don't really care there. So I think that's interesting. I think, like, again, perception rules, whatever. The people cannot get away from it. No matter how long everyone knows that they can't make money on betting markets because they're not smart enough to do it. They still don't say, hey, maybe I'll check this versus what my emotions are telling me as a fandom. So yeah, I agree with some of that. But as far as making changes in the offseason, I do think also teams, like, the media complex is a little bit off as what we're talking about. I mean, for instance, even this last week, an interview of a Saquon Barkley interview will be like a big deal. A Derrick Henry signing will be a big deal. Last offseason, how many, tweets did we get from Adam Schefter about what was going to be happening with Dalvin Cook, who may have been like the 537th most important player in the NFL at that point in time, if that. It proved to be less than that. So I think there's also a problem with, as far as that's concerned. So let's start with quarterback then first. So you have the obvious stuff of guys coming back from injury. So that's going to be a big difference for teams like the Jets, in particular Cincinnati, although, their offense is pretty good actually without Joe Burrow. So Joe Burrow exposed a little bit on that one. You're going to have the rookie quarterbacks coming in. You're going to have quarterbacks who are making a leap into their second year, which is also something that I try to adjust for. Although I don't know how to adjust for guys like CJ Stroud quite as well because they were so good as rookies. And if you project them to make like a second year leap, it becomes a little bit more of a problem. So you have like those kind of buckets that you're looking at for quarterback. Is there anything else that you're doing when you're looking at specifically at quarterback and how that's going to change year over year for these teams?
No, I think the market undervalues. Okay, so the market properly values a quarterback position, right? So it's, as I talked about, there are those teams that have really good rosters, but there's a question mark at quarterback because either it's just unknown, it's a rookie, or it's a retread, or it's a veteran, or whatnot. And so I think those are the teams that get undervalued. And although I think obviously quarterback's the most important position, like not really breaking the code here. I do think there's value if you've got a good coach, a good head coach, an offensive coach that can work with that quarterback to at least make the offense efficient enough, and you've got enough surrounding pieces. I do think there's a little bit of an inefficiency there in the market in terms of undervaluing those types of teams. And we saw it last year with Baker Mayfield in Tampa. It was like a perfect example. We saw it with Geno Smith in Seattle 2 years ago. Even like the Colts with Gardner Minshew last year. Like if you've got good coaching, you've got good enough talent around them, you can win games and exceed expectations. So, I think that the obvious, the Kirk Cousins of the world, Aaron Rodgers of the world, those are fully priced in. And honestly, you could probably make a case maybe overvalued. And we've seen recent history, even Tom Brady, like initially, it's tough for those quarterbacks to adjust to the new surroundings. Tom Brady's probably the only one, maybe Matt Stafford, but a lot of the other ones, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, et cetera. There's Matt Ryan. There's a lot of cases of these guys that go to new teams and really, really struggle. And
we have injury recovery with those guys this year too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And there's a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, how do you price in a guy how do you price in Achilles recoveries for guys that, the Kirk Cousins age and obviously Aaron Rodgers? I don't know. That's where it makes it difficult. I think the Jets, have enough surrounding pieces, and, they won 7 games with the worst quarterback play in the NFL last year. So even if Rodgers isn't more than just an average quarterback, he's probably going to compete and hover around that 9-10 win mark. So, I think you're looking at it the right way. And it's, the more uncertainty you get, the lower the lower the win totals, but the higher the upside. That's why we see a lot of rookie quarterbacks, like CJ Stroud last year. We didn't know, that he was going to turn out this way. And so Houston far exceeded their win total. I think they doubled their win total almost. So, and we see it this year with Jaden Daniels is, Washington's like a 5.5 win total team. The Patriots are like 5. You typically get like this quarterback. If you're a rookie quarterback, unless you're Caleb Williams with, one of the best offenses in the NFL surrounding him, you're just going to automatically be in that kind of lower end of the win total zone. And if you just get, decent quarterback play, because it's hard for a rookie to really exceed expectations like Stroud, you're gonna blow by those expectations. And so for me, like if you think that Jaden Daniels or Drake May is even or even Bo Nix is even, okay, you could probably just not just take the over, but take the alternative over win totals, because you're probably going to win a lot more games than expected. That's how impactful they can be. So I would just say, look at some of the tail end outcomes for some of those quarterbacks that maybe with depressed win totals that you think could exceed expectations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, rather than looking at like a win total where you're concerned about the median outcome, looking at some other markets where you're getting longer odds for the fact that there could be that upside, and that makes a ton of sense. Look, I want to talk about quarterbacks though when they're rookies, because what I thought was interesting is that going into a lot of seasons, I believe that surroundings matter, obviously, for quarterbacks. I'm still not quite sure how much I think they matter vis-a-vis how good the quarterback is, because it seems like it's almost a Rorschach test with some of these guys, where if it's Jared Goff, then they look at it and they say, oh my God, it's all the surroundings, all that matters. And if it's, I don't know, some of these guys love Geno Smith, right? And they'll just be raving about Geno Smith, where it's like, oh, he's got pretty good receivers over there too, and that sort of situation. So with Stroud being able to play so well last year, where I think most people would have at least looked at his surroundings and been like, this is a disaster potentially for a rookie quarterback. Is that something that you can think about, maybe, the range of outcomes for the surroundings also, since there were some relative unknowns that broke out there? Or is that just probably more of a unique circumstance that it would be a little bit of folly to think that could happen again, versus just sticking with your Caleb Williams of the world, who have a more of a set surroundings right now?
Yeah, I don't know. That's tough. I honestly, I definitely undervalued Houston last year. I thought Nico Collins.
You have to, right? You had, that's like I'm saying, you looked around on that roster and you were just like, oh my God, what's going on here?
But that, to me, that's why I'm very high in Houston. And we could talk about them. I know a lot of people are kind of fading them, but because everyone wants to be contrarian, they're kind of the sexy team. But you look at CJ Stroud, he's got the pedigree. We saw what he did at Ohio State. We saw what he did against Georgia in that playoff game, and he comes out as a number 2 pick, and with the most injured offensive line in kind of recent memory, with Nico Collins, who's your number 1, Tank Dell, the rookie who misses a bunch of games, and you got old man Robert Woods walking around. You still were able to win double-digit games and make the playoffs. Pretty impressive. So, yeah, I think at the end of the day, a really good quarterback will elevate all of that talent around him. I don't think, I think that's kind of the ultimate. That proves kind of anything there, is that if you've got the quarterback, he can make any talent, good enough. Even Baker Mayfield as a rookie, he had Jarvis Landry as his number 1 receiver. Now, he didn't pan out, obviously. He's had some good seasons, but, I thought he had good coaching. He obviously had a great run game, great offensive line. So it's hard. I just think that at least it gives, it would give me a good floor going forward if I saw that the quarterback was working with less than kind of normal talent, right? Like the poor surroundings. If you can thrive there, you're going to thrive with really good, upgrades. So, I don't know. You look at a guy like Mitch Trubisky, who, he had good. I thought he had good talent around him, and it kind of elevated him. And then once you start getting injuries, or the defenses start figuring you out, then you're kind of screwed. So it's hard to decipher between, is it the talent around you, or is it you kind of elevating the guys around you? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it is, and especially like earlier. A single season, it can be tough to tell too going forward. Yeah, well, I have some thoughts on Houston, because I probably fall out. At least my numbers fall out on the other side of that. But it's one of those ones that I'm scared of. You have the ones where you're like, I don't know if I you don't necessarily want to blindly go with it, but that'll be interesting. Now, outside of quarterback though, I think we're in, at least from what I've seen, you comment on this, I think we're in somewhat alignment on at least a team this year who could suffer a bit from losses. And then this kind of goes in, at least for me, when I'm tracking this improvement index that I have, which I build in, partially into the power rankings, where it's just looking at players coming and going from the end of the season roster. So last year it was the Eagles, where they lost a ton of players, and every Eagles fan, and maybe a lot of commentators, honestly, since they went all the way, and almost won the Super Bowl, we're basically like, oh, every slot has someone that they're going to fill in who's going to be like just as good, I guess, as a team that went to the Super Bowl. And it's like a nothing burger, the fact that they lost like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, I think thousands of snaps for starters year over year. This year is kind of the Ravens fall into that category a little bit. So you mentioned clusters. So would you be concerned about just like overall losses, or more concerned when we're talking of one particular unit? And I don't know, do you have any concerns about the Ravens because of that issue this year? At least they show up for me this year.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the cluster losses on the offensive line. I think they lose 3 starters. And then you also have, Ronnie Stanley aging and always injured. So that's clearly a fragile situation. And, you're not replacing them with anybody who's, proven. You've got a rookie right tackle potentially. You've got, unproven guys in the interior of the offensive line. So, I mean, that's an issue, although with a Lamar Jackson, how much does that matter when you have running quarterback? I don't know if you've done studies on that where, I feel like I've seen some good data that quarterbacks essentially make the offensive line. Good running quarterbacks, mobile quarterbacks can kind of elevate the offensive line, and so sometimes they get graded a little bit. Their grading's a little bit inflated because of that, but it's still worth discussing. And the secondary is a problem. They weren't great to begin with outside of Kyle. Kyle Hamilton's obviously one of the better players in the NFL, but Marlon Humphrey's getting older. You got a rookie on the other side. The depth isn't great. You don't have really any major edge rushers. You've got Jadeveon Clowney, who left. He was the only kind of proven edge rusher who's now in Carolina. Kyle Van Noy, who you picked up off the street, is on the other side. And so it is definitely an issue. And I think Mike McDonald played a big part in that defense. Before he came in, with similar talent with Wink Martindale, they were like 25th in EPA, I think, the year before McDonald came in. He brought them more to league average the next year. And then last year, they were one of the best units in the NFL. So I think losing him is as important as any of the individual players. So I think offensive line, yes, it matters because you lose multiple guys, multiple starters, and it's unproven, guys behind them. And then, just defensively, between losing the pass rusher in Clowney and losing, Patrick Queen, for whatever it's worth, at linebacker, and then, a couple guys in the secondary, along with Mike McDonald, I think definitely, makes this team pretty fragile. I just think whenever you have a head coach like John Harbaugh, you've got a quarterback who's a top 5 level quarterback in Lamar Jackson. You've got like a proven organization that has, is solid, makes positive. I think, although you may disagree now, some of the decisions that Harbaugh made last year.
They're not getting those comp picks. They're not getting those comp picks anymore. Yeah. I'm worried about that. Yeah.
And kicking a lot of field goals these days, apparently. But yeah, I do think that gives you a little bit of a floor. Now, the problem is Lamar Jackson going to stay healthy? It's kind of, that's always a question mark. And prior to last year, it's been a couple of years. So, that gives you some pause. And honestly, you had Tyler Huntley back there to kind of help you kind of stabilize things. Now, not even sure. Is it Josh Johnson who's the backup? Like it falls off a cliff. So, you have somewhat of a floor with the coaching and the quarterback, but I think the upside might not be there with Baltimore. I hate to say it because I really loved them last year. They just lost so much talent. It's just you were talking about the ESPN analyst before, or just kind of general analysts talking about Derrick Henry. That's all they're focusing on. They're not even thinking about anybody else that they've lost. Not even talking about Mike McDonald, for example. And it's like, running back's really gonna take the ball out of your best player's hands. I'm okay if I'm a defense as good as Derrick Henry can be. Like if you're gonna take the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands, that's not a positive. So if I'm an opponent, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we can talk about them a bit more. It was interesting last year because I was part of the kind of anti-Lamar MVP, and then that went down in flames, obviously, at the end of the season. But what's interesting though is like I feel like even people's opinions on Lamar being the obvious MVP last year, and then also people's opinions on the Ravens were going into the playoffs at least. Your good old-fashioned media power rankings had to put them at number 1, because they beat the 49ers, despite the fact that the 49ers have been massively better the entire rest of the season vis-a-vis competition. But it was all kind of fragile because now that like no one's really backing them, despite the fact you could say, well, they just lost. I mean, they lost a game in the playoffs, but that happens, right? That happens that you end up losing to great teams in the playoffs and going forward. But we can talk about them a little bit more. Let's get into some of the teams. Okay. I categorize this, and I said teams, 4 different categories. Ones that we think may be better than the market, worse than the market, and then again talking about some of these things of teams that project well, like by our numbers, but then maybe our intuition here, our vibes, we're not feeling it quite as much, and then vice versa on that too. So do you want to start and maybe give me one team, at least initially, that you're thinking looks pretty good? And I'm going to say versus the market again. I'm using for the market numbers where we have some initial lines for the first couple of weeks of the season. You can kind of put it through a whole little linear algebra type of thing and come out with some points based power ranking. So that's what I'm using based upon this. I'll tell you the numbers that I have for the different power rankings versus what you may have. What is there a team that you want to highlight? And if you want to go like near the top, that'll be even better than you think. So we're talking about like a Super Bowl contender type, or maybe even more where you're saying is the niche that you like, which are the teams who are floating around maybe in most people's minds of mediocrity, who could surprise and then make it into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you one of each.
Sure.
I think from the top end, I like the Eagles a lot this year. I've got a Super Bowl wager on them. And it's funny, I'm just not seeing as much hype around them after last year. Everyone just penciled them in as a repeat Super Bowl contender. So I personally, and again, this may go against your. I mean, I trust my numbers and things like that, but I also have a little. I understand and I appreciate and I respect the disease of me. I really think that's a real thing in sports, and we can't quantify it. Right. But I just think it's real. I think when you work so hard, you work all year, and you get to the end of a Super Bowl and you lose at the very last second, to just start all over again and go through that full process. I think there is a little bit of kind of like, all right, we just kind of wave through the regular season. Let's just kind of get to the playoffs. You get a little bit of complacency. Players are looking to get paid, all those sorts of things. I think that stuff is real. And so I think it was a combination of like they lost players in the offseason last year. They lost both their coordinators. They get some injuries, one of the most decimated secondaries in the NFL. And then, they have a really brutal stretch where they have to play like 6 straight, elite teams in the NFL that really took a toll on them. And, they suffered, and they still made the playoffs after all of that. And so I think this is kind of one of those bounce back years where, I think they picked the right types of players to fill holes. They obviously have a huge need in the secondary. They were just, the middle of the field was a mess. They're going to bring back Slay and bring back Bradbury. And I don't know how much he has left, but they draft Quentin Mitchell in the first round. There's the number one cornerback on a lot of teams' boards. They get Cooper DeJean, who can be a versatile safety cornerback in the second round. They bring back Avonte Maddox, who missed most of the season, who's one of the better slot cornerbacks in the NFL. So he should be back healthy. And then they picked up a guy who no one's even talking about, Isaiah Rodgers from the Colts, who got suspended all year for gambling. People forget 2 years ago with the Colts, he was a young player on the rise. He was, I think, PFF's number 6 graded coverage cornerback in the NFL. So, he's a guy who's kind of just in the mix as like your number 5 corner. So I think they're pretty deep there. And I do think they addressed a major need. Obviously, you bring in Vic Fangio, and whatever happened last year in Miami, we know who he is. We know he brings stability. He's going to prevent explosive plays, which was their big downfall last year, especially on third down, high leverage plays. They were dead last in explosive plays allowed, which really killed them. They were okay. They were good enough on early downs. It was the late downs that really killed them. So I think defensively they're going to be fine, and I think they're going to be much improved. And then offensively, losing Kelsey is a bummer, but it's he's still a center. the Cam Jurgens is going to replace him. He's a highly pedigreed second round pick. He's played fine so far in his young career. I think they'll be okay. They got enough surrounding offensive
Jason
linemen.
Kelsey, though, he's the most important offensive lineman in the history of the NFL. So I feel like he's grown into that status by now.
My favorite is people don't think they can do the tush push now because he's gone. It's like,
I know that's my pet peeve too. Like let's compare Jalen Hurts to your average quarterback versus Jason Kelsey to your average center, right?
Yeah, and so I think they'll be fine there. And honestly, 99% of the time, I wouldn't even talk about a running back being impactful. I think Barkley with this specific team, with what they need, I think he's going to be valuable. I think he does bring an element that they didn't have. First of all, the difference between what we saw with the Giants offensive lines for Barkley's entire career and what he'll see in Philly is just night and day. Like you rarely see a flip like that. The yards before contact, Philly is always top 5 in the NFL in that metric, which I think is at least a good kind of barometer for, is your offensive line creating holes? You obviously have the gravity with Jalen Hurts back there running RPO, the threat of him out of the backfield. And, DeAndre Swift, his numbers look okay from kind of a surface level, but if you dig in, he was getting easy yards. He wasn't creating yardage, wasn't breaking any tackles. His explosive play rate was well below expected. If you look at kind of yards over expectation. So you bring a guy in Barkley, you give him an open space, like he can create those explosive plays. We know he's good in the passing game. If you're gonna bring in a running back and call him a valuable piece, he's got to be able to do 2 things in my opinion. He's got to be able to create explosive plays on his own, and he has to catch the ball out of the backfield and increase the pass game threat. So he does those things. And I think with this specific team, he's kind of a perfect he's a perfect landing spot. So I just think with Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator, I think he brings a little bit more of a fast-paced, up-tempo offense that they were missing last year, that they lost after Shane Steichen left. So all that being said, there's look at their schedule, very manageable. Looks like one of the top 10 easier schedules based on my ratings. So I think all of that being said, and Dallas kind of struggling, I think they're kind of a team that might miss the playoffs. It's an easy division. I think they're a good bet to come out of the NFC for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because they fell into the category of team that didn't project as well in my numbers, being more in that kind of like 10 to 15 sort of range than I would have thought based upon what I believe. And I mean, I'll just, just according to the things that I'm putting together, and this was interesting about them last season, is you saw the perceptions on, I don't know about Hurts, but maybe the offense. There's all this talk about the offense last year. All the like play caller talk when someone leaves and the offense is not performing well. When reality, when I looked at it, like their offense actually didn't really fall off that much. It's just their defense was so god awful that it affected the perceptions of everything. And you didn't get as much like tush push juice in the second half of the season as maybe you were getting earlier, where they weren't necessarily playing as well. So I guess that would be the thing. And that's one of the reasons when I look at this number and how bad I have them projected to be defensively. I mean, we're talking about like a bottom 5 sort of unit based upon what I saw last year, and at least superficially the personnel changes. But like you mentioned, I'm not tracking like every single injury that happened within beyond quarterback, quite honestly, for what may happen this year, the fact that everything kind of all went wrong at the same time, all those sorts of things. So that's why I have them in the category of a team that I would kind of fade even what my own modeling is telling me, because of that defensive side, where I have them being a pretty good offensive team. And I've seen some thoughts about, Jalen Hurts, and he's really fallen, I think, in some people's standings after coming off of being the runner-up in the MVP race a couple seasons ago. He's kind of fallen in some people's minds, where I don't think he's that much different. And maybe I'd be more concerned about him if it was like injury prone sort of thing, and he was really losing a lot when it came to the weapons he's going to be throw it to. But this is still a Philadelphia Eagles roster, in particular on offense, where through contract structuring, they're stuffing in like 200 million APY worth of players into like 100 million on the cap because of how much they're kicking forward into the future. So I guess I just don't have concerns with him falling off because of everything that's around him still also.
Yeah, and you look at some of his number. I mean, he clearly didn't play as well last year, but I think he was he had the 6th highest interception rate. But if you look at PFF's turnover worthy play rate, he had the 10th lowest out of like 45 quarterbacks. So he got a little bit unlucky with some of those turnovers. Maybe he got lucky 2 years ago on the other side. I don't know, but there is a little bit of potential regression there in that regard. And I think that, look, Brian Johnson was their OC last year. Was he even qualified? I don't even know where he is right now. I'm not even sure if he's qualified to be an OC. Kellen Moore, for all his potential warts, like he does kind of fall in line with some of the kind of the higher pass rate over expectation that you'd like to see. I think he'll use motion a lot more. Philly was, I think, dead last or 31st in motion rate last year. So there'll be more up tempo. They were a little slower than you would have thought last year. So some of those things that I think will help this offense and make Hurts a little bit more comfortable that he's used to, can only be additive. And I think defensively, it's probably hard. I don't know, like how you put all your numbers together. Between there is a lot of injury regression that they're going to be.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
I definitely do not have enough of that beyond quarterback. Really, I gotta just try to do more of a mental adjustment on once we get beyond quarterback.
Yeah, they had multiple. I mean, they had cluster injuries in the secondary with Slay and Maddox, their two top corners. So, and then it was funny. Like you look at their third down numbers, they were last in sack rate and allowed the most explosive pass plays in the NFL. Like to me, that's coaching. I think a lot of that either is bad luck or it's coaching because they're not nearly as bad as that. We know that. And people used to rip on Gannon a couple of years ago. His number one mantra was, preventing explosive plays. He kept everything in front. He let those, pass rushers kind of get to the quarterback. You would think some of that would recover, and you think that it's a Fangio type of scheme. Fangio wants to keep everything in front. So, if they can minimize that, I think that's going to help them a lot.
Yeah. The explosive play thing is always a little bit. It's tough to tell sometimes. Your Browns were a victim of that for many a year, and that kind of turned around and helped them be successful last year. And it's like, why? I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes you just don't know. I mean, you can build a lot of theories as to what's going on here. Okay, so but maybe a team now that we have more in that middle range that you think might get into the playoffs.
Yeah, I like the Vikings.
That's interesting. Now this is really because this is a team that looks good by my numbers, and I'm like, I don't like the city. You're getting both sides. You're getting both sides of my numbers here.
Yeah, I mean, if you stripped out quarterback, I don't know, look, it's kind of stupid to look at it this way, but just for theory, if you stripped out quarterback and you looked at the rest of the rosters in the NFL and including coaching, I mean, I would argue Minnesota is like around 8 to 10 in terms of the best roster / plus coaching staffs in the NFL. So you've got the number one receiver in the NFL in Justin Jefferson. You've got a really good. I thought Aaron Jones was really good with Green Bay last year. It really helped. I mean, 6 straight 100-yard games to end the year. Thought he helped that Jordan Love and that offense elevate. You've got a good offensive line, one of the best left tackles in the NFL. You've got TJ Hawkinson, a top 5 tight end. Defensively, I don't worry about defense. The talent isn't great. You lose Danielle Hunter, but you do bring in Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel, who I thought was a little bit underrated in Miami. And the defense is going to be fine.
They were pretty good defensively with adjustments last year. They were good. Yeah,
I mean, Brian Flores, they were 15th or 16th in EPA when you adjust for schedule. It was like 9th best according to my numbers. And he muddies up the game. Like he'll blitz from anywhere. He'll show you all sorts of different.
I had him in that 6 to 10 range basically for a defense last year when you adjust everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not worried. I don't care what talent's back there. We know that you're going to get at worst kind of average average defensive play. Maybe better. And I like Kevin O'Connell on offense. And to me, it all comes down to what happens at quarterback, right? So to me, I have 2 bites at the apple at this. I've got either JJ McCarthy is better than than you get from a rookie. He's really the real deal, or he's just not ready at all. And I've got Sam Darnold. Okay, and what is Sam Darnold? Well, we know historically he's been pretty bad. The last time we saw him, no one's even paying attention to this because I actually couldn't believe this when I looked it up. Last time we saw him, he is 2022 in Carolina. I think he he played the last 9 games of the season. I think it was in Carolina. They went on a little bit of a run there. And he was I think 3rd in the NFL in EPA in the final back half of the year. I think he only had 1 or 2 negative EPA games. He did a great job of taking care of the ball. And he did it with DJ Moore and no offensive line, a bad offensive staff, and no running game. I mean, he didn't have McCaffrey at that time. It was like Deontay Foreman. So, he was fine. And maybe, you never know, a year in San Francisco, maybe he kind of, figured out some things, have a Baker Mayfield-like resurgence. It's very possible. And again, he doesn't have to be great for me for Minnesota to get over this win total and to, compete for a wild card. He just has to be okay because he's got the weapons around him. He's got the coaching. We saw, look what Kevin O'Connell did with Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins last year. Like they were by success rate, they were essentially middle of the pack in the NFL with those quarterbacks. And those guys, I think they committed the most turnovers in the NFL after Kirk Cousins got hurt. So, he's done a lot with little, and Sam Darnold at worst is better than Dobbs and Nick Mullins. So I just think you just need kind of average quarterback play. And I like I said, I got 2 bites at the apple here. I've got either, Darnold is kind of resurrected a little bit and has a, Baker or Geno Smith type of season that we saw in the last couple of years, or, JJ McCarthy is actually good or actually not bad. He can run an offense. And you get the coaching with O'Connell and Flores. And I don't think the schedule is weird because they're not facing a ton of great teams. They're facing obviously the Lions twice, who, I don't think is as good as advertised, but, is what, we'll see. And I think maybe I have to look at their schedule. Maybe they have either Baltimore or the Niners is the other. I think the Niners is the other really elite team, but everybody else is kind of like middle of the pack. It's a bunch of, it's a bunch of teams like, Green Bay and, the Colts and the Jags and the Bears. Like, it's not.
They get the AFC South, so that's nice.
Yeah, so it's fine. Like the schedule's like kind of middle of the road. I think they can navigate that, and like I said, this is the sweet spot in that 6.5 to 7.5 win total range that we've seen. I think we've seen 7 teams in the last 2 years make the playoffs in this kind of range. We saw the Rams and the Bucks last year, Colts, I think, or not the Colts, but the Rams and the Bucks in this range make the playoffs. So I just think that no one's talking about it. I think there's value there. And like I said, if you just get average quarterback play, this team is probably a 10-win team, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's another thing where I guess I didn't realize because I totally stopped paying attention to them for the fact that Kirk Cousins was in some ways was like playing the best that he ever had early in the year with a lot of unlucky turnovers and interceptions on plays that were not even turnover-worthy passes and things like that. Like he was outstanding, but the record wasn't very good, even with Kirk Cousins, right? And then he got injured, and then it was like, okay, I don't have to pay attention to these guys again the rest of the year. And of course, you had the Josh Dobbs thing. I remember when Josh Dobbs became like, if we sign Josh Dobbs, we can make the pass. Like, what was going on? Talking about insanity, temporary.
Honestly, what they should have done, I was arguing with the Vikings. Well, I wasn't arguing. We were on the same side. I was like, once Kirk Cousins got hurt, like, you should have just tanked the season. Like, let just Justin Jefferson sit the rest of the year. Put whoever you want, and trading anything for Dobbs didn't make much sense. So that was a little bit weird, but is what it is. I mean, it's some of these coaching staffs want to win games, but I was looking at the numbers. So what happened early in the year? So if you remember 2 years ago, the Vikings were 11-0 in one-score games. It was a complete farce that they made the playoffs. They were not nearly as good as their record, and so everybody predicted close game regression. And I think their win total was only like 8.5, 9. And they were the first 5-6 games with Cousins. They lost every single game by 1 score.
Yeah. It was one of those things where people say like, "Oh, the regression is hit," and it's like, no, it's actually worse. Like regression would be they're like on par with what they should be doing. No, they're on the flip side of things.
Exactly. Now. Yeah. And then he gets, and they were playing fine. They were playing really well, and then he got hurt in that Green Bay game, and then it was kind of season over. I just think that. It was just the way it was really impressive the way that they kind of held on with Dobbs and without Justin Jefferson a lot of those games. And like I said, lack of talent on defense, it showed me a lot. And I think that, again, that gives me a floor when I look at these things. Like, even if the quarterback situation isn't great, you're going to be competitive in a lot of these games because you showed it last year against a really tough schedule. And, hopefully, with improved quarterback play and improved in terms of the injury front, you can actually compete for a division and, at least a wild card.
Yeah. I'm interested to see Darnold in, I guess everything is like a Shanahan system or whatever, but after having some experience in that and then moving forward, because I think what's interesting with Darnold is sometimes people get infatuated with watching him make some improbable plays, but quite honestly, like his problem has been just massively negative plays that he makes when it comes to turnovers and other things like that, where he's kind of trying to, write checks that his arm can't cash, or he can't get out of it. So like, if he can play within himself I think there is a possibility. He's also one of these quarterbacks who, like, every year he would have a stretch of a few games where he looks really, really good, and then he'd have a stretch of a few games where he just completely god awful. So if they can, you just have to restrain him, I think, a little bit. And if he's just executing what you're asking him to do, Maybe he can turn a corner. And of course, if you want to talk about Darnold, I don't know how much it matters at this point, but he just turned 27 years old, which is kind of shocking. Also, that it feels like he's been around for quite a long time, and he's still like in his early prime, you could say, for an NFL quarterback.
I mean, well, look at the talent he's had around him. I mean, between the coaching and the talent, like it's crazy. I mean, Robbie Anderson was the best receiver he ever had in New York. Horrible offensive lines. We know Adam Gase is Adam Gase. You look at Carolina. He had a stint with looking back that Frank Reich coaching staff wasn't very good. He had DJ Moore and nobody else at bad offensive line. He's never had even like an average offensive line and multiple weapons like he's got here. So I don't know. Like I said, people laughed at me when I thought Tampa was interesting last year as a surprise team. These situations occur where you just underestimate what's around a quarterback with good pedigree. And like I said, I'm not looking for Minnesota to win the Super Bowl here. I'm just looking for them to exceed their win total, be frisky, maybe compete for a wild card. And to me, that's where they're at this point.
Yeah, and I think Darnold's tendency to try to do too much also could like make a bad situation worse sometimes. And that, that wasn't helpful. I mean, for what it's worth also, and maybe I'll think about this a little bit in the back of my mind, we are talking about year 3 here of the KOC, Adolfo Mensa regime here. So you better get something going. You better get something going this season. I don't think you're going to get that much of we had a crap season, but we got a rookie quarterback who had some flashes. So we're going to bring you back next year. I mean, traditionally this would be it. So I think they are going to try to push in for whatever they can. And we've seen that a little bit in the offseason for what they're doing. Okay. Rather than bring up my own, because I don't have anything that's that revolutionary here. What about some teams that you think may be worse than what the market is saying?
Yeah, we talked about Baltimore already, kind of fits that. I mean, I feel like, so there's 2 teams, Detroit and Dallas, to me, both. One of them is going to miss the playoffs, I think. Trying to figure out which one. And I mean, Dallas is the low-hanging fruit, right? Because everybody is expecting the team to fall off a cliff with, obviously the contract disputes going on, losing Tony Pollard, they bring back Zeke. That's only a negative. And then, obviously the offensive line, Tyron Smith is gone. They lose their center. They're replacing him with a 21-year-old rookie at left tackle.
Yeah. I mean, another team, not as bad as Baltimore, but essentially like did nothing in over the offseason. Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got a top 8 quarterback in place. You've got maybe the best defensive player in the NFL. So like you've got pieces there. Diggs coming back. You've got pieces there to qualify for, like, this team should make the playoffs. But there's just a lot going on, and I think some of those contract issues, if you don't get them solved during before the season, is Dak going to play through? I mean, I know it sounds bad, but is Dak going to play through nagging injuries if he's if he doesn't have a contract? You never know. Those things can come up and affect the team. And last year they were bullies. They beat up on all the bad teams. If you look at their schedule last year, it was pretty ridiculous. So they played every awful team you can find in the NFL. And they played the Giants and Washington 4 times, and they blew out those teams like every time. And so, they struggled against anybody when they had to step up in competition. I think they were 3-5 against playoff teams. So, if you have at least an average looking schedule, it's going to make things difficult. And then with Detroit, I just feel like everyone is just penciling them in as a Super Bowl team, going to make the NFC, championship game again. And I just don't feel like it's that simple. They've exceeded expectations multiple years. And now it's like, they're the ones who everyone's going after. I think at some point, like, Ben Johnson is very good, but at some point, like, these offensive coordinators do get figured out when you get a full off season for teams to game plan. Like, not saying the offense is going to struggle, but it's not going to be as easy all the time. You've got Jared Goff, who, is not turned into a pumpkin just yet, but he's had his moments. There was a point last year where he had multiple turnovers against the Bears that, they had a big comeback. He was terrible in Chicago. He doesn't have to play a lot of outdoor games, which is a plus, but, he's not an automatic to, he's not Patrick Mahomes. Like, we just can't pencil him in, I think, for an MVP caliber season every year. And, they lose, and say what you want. Josh Reynolds is kind of a whatever, but he's an outside receiver. He's a big body guy that they did not replace him with. There's really nobody outside that they're going to put in there. Any sort of, there's some fragility, I think, at receiver. If Amon-Ra St. Brown gets hurt, the offensive line is still very good, so that's a plus. Defensively is a question mark. They weren't very good last year. They have a bunch of rookies in the back end. They didn't add any real major pass rush help, which was a big issue. So, are they really, are they going to be a middle of the road defense? I'm just not sure. They won a bunch of close games last year. They got a bunch of, positive, when you look at some of the, luck factors that could regress. I don't know. I still they'll be good. I just don't think it's an automatic that they're this kind of elite Super Bowl team that is going to blow everybody away. So I just think between Dallas and Detroit, one of those teams will kind of fall off. I'm just not exactly sure which one.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more in agreement when it comes to Dallas, whereas Detroit, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, just purely by the numbers that I run on there. I mean, they just come out really good offensively, and maybe like the Goff factor, you could say, you're worried about, but maybe in a similar way to what I was saying about Jalen Hurts, is I just don't really see anything, and there could be a figuring outedness when it comes to offensive coordinators, but I think often those come in conjunction with like talent going down around on offense also. And I think that they're also a team where, in a couple of years, they're going to have some problems figuring out what they're going to do with all these guys that they signed to big contracts. But in the meantime, they have a pretty like healthy surroundings that they've been able to run back this year with minimal effect as far as having to let anyone go. So I don't know, like maybe there's some bottom falling out sort of potential, but I feel like Goff might not get enough credit for like when things are good around him. He really is good. Like he's good at delivering the ball where it needs to go, as long as he's not being too harried in the process.
I do find it interesting though. If you look at their pass rate versus expectations, it's actually one of the lower ranked teams in the NFL. I think that's more indicative of, I don't know. I mean, I know they gave him a big contract in the offseason, but so it sounds pretty contradictory. But like, do they fully trust Jared Goff all the time? I mean, like I said, there was a stretch, around Thanksgiving where he was really struggling for a couple of games. He was terrible against the Packers. If you remember in that loss, he was pretty bad against the Bears. Like there was a couple game stretch where they just said, all right, we're just gonna run the ball. We're gonna rely on our offensive line and let the run game kind of dictate things, and then mix in play action pass here and there. So, I don't know. I get a little bit nervous that when you're not fully trusting your quarterback and you just can't always, when you're down, like, can you give him the ball and just, assume that he's going to, make plays for you? You kind of have to structure things around him. It's not always, again, I'm not saying they're a bad team. I'm not saying they're going to be a 500. I just think they're not an elite team. I don't put them in the same category as, the Chiefs and the Niners, and even I think the Eagles are better. Honestly, if you put them on a neutral field right now, I would favor the Eagles. It's just me personally, but we'll see. I just think eventually, Goff's colors could shine here and on a negative way. And they haven't gotten really many injuries on the offensive line. And this is like of all the position groups, offensive line, it's really hard to string multiple years together where you don't see any injuries. And so actually the offense in general has been pretty healthy. So, but again, I have to give them credit that the fact that they go for on fourth down all the time and they go for two when they're supposed to, for the most part, that does, increase your win probability in these close games. They've won a bunch of close games last year. But that is, a lot of that is because they did that for themselves. So, it'll be interesting to see if they can sustain it for a third year in a row. I mean, this team has covered the spread over 70% back-to-back years, which is unheard of. Like you don't see that
grit.
Ever.
That's called grit.
So the market has clearly undervalued them for 2 straight years. So maybe the market's catching up, and you might see some overvalue. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. It's one of those things where I'm just resigned to the fact that they're going to be good again this year, and everyone's going to yell at me for being critical of Brad Holmes over the last 2 seasons. But it's one of those things where it's like, not yet, guys. Like he's with the bad moves. They take a while. They take a while to actually sink in. So yeah. And bad contracts, if you want to call the Goff contract a bad contract. And I think it's hard to call it a good contract. It's hard to call it a value add sort of contract. But again, not this year. It's going to be, it's hard to critique some of these things because everyone only cares about what's going to happen over the next, 3 weeks, as opposed to when these things actually start to take effect. Okay. So what I want to talk Texans a bit here, because I guess my numbers don't like the Texans very much at all. Only because there was at least some lucky-ish sort of stuff coming through on there. I do some quarterback adjustments on here where Stroud, at least according to charting that I got here from FTN data, had some turnover-worthy plays that didn't turn into interceptions. A lot of people have been touting like how few interceptions he threw last year, and it was like, I don't know if he was actually that good at doing that. Some explosive plays that they had advantage of, things like that. Not a very difficult schedule. But people are very, very high on their like Super Bowl chances, not quite as high if you look at their betting power ranking. There may be something like in the 10th to 11th chance, but in the Super Bowl chances are much, much higher. MVP chances for Stroud, he's in the top 6 or 7 players, I think, as far as that's concerned. So really looking at like the upside here. So how do we think about upside for a team where you had, one of the best rookie years for the quarterback last year, and maybe I'm just a little bit concerned about sophomore slump type of potential. But then again, eventually one of these guys ends up being the next elite, fantastically great quarterback, and maybe it is CJ Stroud.
Yeah, I mean, I posted this earlier. I just kind of generically, I was looking at the top EPA seasons since I think it's 2010 amongst rookie quarterbacks. He had the 6th best season based on EPA. And when you look at some of the names in that kind of top, 8-ish group or so around where he finished, you typically see a continuation, or for the most part, a continuation the next season. I mean, you've got guys like Cam Newton who finished 8th in EPA and actually increased his numbers the next year. You saw Herbert increased his numbers, was 7th in the league in EPA the next year. Russell Wilson, actually his numbers went down a little bit, but he was still top 8 in EPA. Brock Purdy went from number 2 in EPA 2 years ago, and he was number 1 in the NFL in EPA the next season. And, I just see between that, the fact that they didn't have they didn't have an offensive line last year. It was the most, if you look at some of the old Football Outsiders kind of adjusted games lost metric, if you believe in that stuff. I mean, they had the most injuries along the offensive line of any team in their database. Just the number of starters that they had to filter through, and it's not like they had a lot of good backups here. So he had to deal with that. He had to deal with his receiving core. Very generic, it's Nico Collins is your number 1, and Robert Woods was up there, and Tank Dell was hurt for the most part.
People love Nico Collins now, though. It's crazy. It's
I know.
Crazy. I honestly, I'll cop to the fact that I'm not watching a ton of Nico Collins like all 22 cut-ups. But I might fade the fact that he's like a top 5 receiver or something like that. That I've legitimately seen him ranked as like 6th or 7th in receivers on some lists.
Well, it's funny, when he came out of Michigan, he was one of those guys that had a lot. His kind of advanced metrics from a speed and
athleticism. His athleticism was great. Yeah, but what was really he, a pick or something? Yeah,
he was. Yeah, I think because I remember I wanted the Browns to take him, and Houston jumped in front of the Browns 1 pick and they took Collins, and then the Browns were stuck with Anthony Schwartz. That's just talk about a bad
3rd round pick. You're right. Yeah, it was 3rd round pick. Anthony Schwartz. Yeah, what's up with the Browns? Anyway,
we can talk about it, but so. Yeah, I mean, I think so. He did it with no offensive line. He did it with a mediocre receiving core. I think, as a rookie, that's pretty damn impressive. And like I said, he's got the pedigree. It's not like he was a 4th round pick that kind of came out of nowhere and maybe has like a flash in the pan. And the guy came from one of the top schools in the country. He was awesome in college. He was awesome, when it mattered against maybe the best defense we've ever seen in college against that Georgia team. He's lighting them up. He's a prototypical size, arm strength, all those sorts of things. And then he comes in his rookie year and does what he does with those kind of negative factors around him. And now you've got an upgrade. Obviously, whatever you think of Stephon Diggs, he may not be a number 1 anymore. But man, if he's your number 2 or number 3 guy, or at least at worst is kind of your 3rd down, kind of, will make a play when you need it. That's a positive. And I think Bobby Slowick he's getting a lot of praise. I don't know. I thought he ran the ball way too much last year. They're trying to protect him. Maybe it's because of that offensive line on early downs. I think they're going to open things up a little bit more. They started to do it later in the year. His pass rate increased versus expectations in the back half of the season. I think you'll see a little bit more of that. I just think that, offensively, they're just going to be really good. I just don't know how you poke holes in a guy like Stroud in this offense. And then defensively, they played an easy schedule last year. There's no doubt about it. So this could be a step up in class. But obviously Danielle Hunter is a really, that's a guy you like at edge. Their quarterback situation is a little bit iffy. And I'll say that is their downfall to me would be their defense. I think their offense will be fine no matter what. It's their defense that could be the downfall. So you could see a lot of shootouts here. And then we'll see what happens. Like I said, I don't know if they're a Super Bowl contender. I think that the win total you mentioned was a little bit depressed. It doesn't look like a Super Bowl contender. That's pure schedule, in my opinion. I think it's a little bit of juice on the over at 9.5. But if you look at their schedule, they've got one of the tougher schedules in the NFL compared to other AFC South teams. Their crossover games are pretty brutal. It's like Kansas City, Baltimore, and Detroit, whereas the rest of the division is playing a lot easier schedule. So maybe that's pricing in some of that, that schedule strength. But yeah, I think this is a 10-win team. I think a 10, 11-win team is fair. I just don't see a regression from Stroud, whether that turns into, a Super Bowl contender or not, or an MVP. I'm not sure. But I think from his perspective, I think he's going to be really good. It's just hard for me. Maybe it's my Ohio State bias in me, but there's nothing I've seen that says like this guy's going to take a step back. I don't know where that comes from with considering all those other outside factors he had to deal with last year.
Yeah. I mean, I might be thinking a little too much on a contrarian basis too, because there's this interesting thing where I think generally I'm more of a believer that, rookie season matters for quarterbacks. Like you're saying, if you just do a simple cutoff, if you just plot out guys based upon their PFF grading and their EPA per play, and you look at the top quadrant versus the bottom quadrant, it's like, whoa, a lot of those top quadrant guys end up being good. A lot of those bottom quadrant guys end up not being that good. But I do think we have there's asymmetry when it comes to at least media diagnosis of these guys, where the guys who stink, who people liked as prospects, they'll say like, oh, we'll just throw this rookie season away. It doesn't matter, sort of thing. And then the guys who are good, almost universally, everyone's like, oh, they're going to continue to be awesome. So it's like you can't have both of those things, right? So that's why I wonder, maybe there's a little bit more downside when it comes to Stroud than we think about. But again, I mean, I agree with you. I think he got unfairly kind of battered around in the draft cycle. With comps in the range of like Jared Goff and Dak and other things, where I don't know why. I guess if you're not Anthony Richardson in terms of athleticism, then it's like you're Jared Goff or something. It kind of made no sense in that process.
Well, it was the I'm already. Was the S2 test? That was what it was.
That was part of it. Yeah.
I think that was a big part of it. And then
I kind of feel bad for those guys. I'm sure there's some value in this test, but like they had everything anchored on this one guy who ended up being awesome. So that's RIP.
Yeah, I mean that's
people.
Yeah, that was a problem. But I mean, I think a lot of people thought, he had so much talent at receiver. And the other thing that drives me nuts is when you hear, Ohio State quarterbacks don't pan out. Like one has nothing to do with the other. That's the thing that people.
And that's going back to the Tedford quarterbacks don't pan out for Aaron Rodgers slipping all the way down in the draft. So
and the air raid quarterbacks with Mahomes, right? That's really what it is. It's like it doesn't work out till it does. But yeah. I think when you look at a guy like Mac Jones, I think you're saying you don't automatically see that progression in year two. But like I just think like you got a guy like Mac Jones with one of the best coaches of all time, a good Josh McDaniels, everyone agrees is really good. He had he had all the surrounding pieces, good scheme. They schemed his way to a really good rookie season. Like he didn't have the pedigree that a guy like Stroud does. I just think like that's a situation where we should have seen at least a stall in progression. It wasn't going to be upwards. Whereas a guy I just feel like Stroud fits that. He's a top 5 pick. He came from a great school, has all the measurables, and did it. Like the thing with me is he did it with all of those negative factors around him last year. If he had, perfect offensive line health, he had, one of the best receivers in the NFL out there. And they were just kind of scheming things for him. That's a different story. But I just think with what he had to deal with, and on top of that, all the pedigree positives, I just think that it's really hard for him to fail, in my opinion. Or at least he should be a top 10-ish quarterback, whether he's number 2 or 3 or 4, or he's like 10. That remains to be seen. But I think he's going to be in that category.
Yeah. I think when it comes to Mac Jones, I mean, Mac Jones probably not that good. And at the same point in time, like, that was a disaster in New England, like over the last couple of years. And there's basically no chance that we're going to see something when it comes from a play calling, strategic talent standpoint around CJ Stroud, fall apart like that. If anything, they're on the come up there. Again, they're one of these teams where, I'm not a big fan of like the Stephon Diggs trade from a value perspective, but hey, for this year, why the hell not? Okay. Are there any teams that maybe you want to buy? Well, let me mention a team here that looks good by my numbers that I can't believe in. And you can, it probably is similar to your Jared Goff takes or things like, not yours specifically, but, like feelings about being queasy around guys like a Jared Goff who may project to do really well this year is, like, the Dolphins actually look pretty good by my numbers. They look pretty good offensively. Maybe there's some bias there for, weather and other things. Once they get into the playoffs, they'll end up falling apart. The explosives can't continue, things like that. I don't know. They still look pretty good, but by my numbers, but no one seems to really be believing in them. What are your thoughts on the Dolphins?
Yeah, they're like such a hard team for me to grasp because against overmatched teams, they'll just destroy teams, and that's what we saw early last year. Like you can't defend the speed, and if you're not physical at the line, you can't get a pass rush on Tua, you're kind of dead. So I think they can overpower those types of teams, but when they step up in class, like it's just really hard for them to, I guess out scheme really good defenses and good coordinators and whatnot. And I don't know how when you do your ratings, how much you value offense over defense. I just think their defense is going to stink. I think they lost so much.
It's about like 60-40 type of situation, 65-35, depending in the offseason.
I think, first of all, losing Fangio isn't great. You're bringing Anthony Weaver from Baltimore. You're kind of hoping he brings that Mike McDonald scheme with him. Who knows if that's going to work out? So that's a big question. But you lose your best, defensive, front seven guy in Wilkins. You don't really replace him at all. Your best pass rushers were Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, who both ended their year last year late with injuries. I mean, Phillips coming off an Achilles, can he even play this year? I don't know. If he does, he's probably not going to be effective this year. Bradley Chubb coming off a torn knee, which he'll probably come back, but again, he's not going to be 100%. So you've got major issues. You drafted a rookie that you're really going to rely on. Chop Robinson in the first round is your kind of top edge rusher to start the year. So you're going to have no pass rush at all. You've got Jalen Ramsey back there, which is great. But, you don't really have much at the linebacking core in terms of coverage, which I think matters. Jerome Baker is one of the better coverage linebackers. He's gone. You bring Jordan Brooks in, a failed first-round pick with Seattle, who's one of the worst coverage linebackers in the NFL the last couple of years. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of holes on that defense. But again, the offense is going to be so good against the bad, overpowered teams that they'll rack up wins. It's just when you get late in the year, like you said, it matters that you can't really move the ball, and your explosive pass rate is going to really decrease against when you got cold. You're playing in tough cold conditions and better defenses. And late in the year, they have to face the Browns on a Sunday night. Which is interesting. And then they have to face the Jets at night. They have to face the Packers on Thanksgiving night. So you've got a lot of kind of cold weather games that maybe they'll prepare them for the playoffs. I think it's one of those, it's hard for me to say. Like, they've got the upside. They've got enough there that you can envision a Super Bowl. But, do I feel confident about it? I don't. But it's not impossible. I think there's enough there on offense to give you that upside. There's other teams that I don't see as having that upside in that range, but I think might be a better overall team. So it's a long-winded way to say I could see them get there. I could see they've got longer tails than some others, but I'm just a little bit wary of that defense and obviously that offense when they step up.
Another team that I thought that my numbers might be lower on, but they're not. And maybe, again, this is just my general contrarianness because I'm seeing a little bit too much Packers and Jordan Love, I guess, out there from some people. But then I ran the numbers. I'm like, oh, you know what? They don't look that bad. Like, they actually look like it should be able to maintain, a top 10 type of offense. And maybe I'm not buying necessarily the jump up even further, because Love had this weird season where he started off really hot, and there were, at least according to my numbers, some problems, like he was getting explosives and other things that weren't necessarily going to continue. Then he was bad, and everyone was like, "Oh, I don't know if this is going to work." And then he was good, but like legitimately good down the stretch. And the rest of the season, there wasn't that fluff in there anymore the rest of the way. So I guess I want to be low on them, but then my numbers want to be high on them. What do you think about the Packers?
Yeah, I'm kind of in that in between range too. That was one of my I had Green Bay, Tampa, and Indy as my three kind of in that dead zone I talked about last year as kind of upside surprise teams. Is because and all of this is always about expectations versus reality. Nobody knew if Jordan Love was good. Like we just assumed that he was bad, right? Off of
You say more likely than not he's bad. It's like last offseason I was arguing with people where I was like, Love is probably bad. Like Ritter is really probably bad just because of his pedigree and everything else. And then you know what? Ritter was really, really bad and Love was good. But hey, it happens. Right. It's not a guarantee they're all going to be bad.
Exactly, but they were being priced like he was bad, which is the thing. And so all you don't need.
Rodgers wasn't great the year before either.
Exactly.
So
to compare, he was like 21st in EPA 2 years ago. So it's like he didn't need much to kind of match that. So so it's funny, as someone who was that's all I was talking about last offseason. I had Packers to make the playoffs. I had Packers all to over. So like that was a team I was just hyped. I was like, look, he had a good offensive coach on the floor. Smart guy. It makes good decisions. Good talent on defense, and if Love was just decent, you could win some games, and that's what we saw. But I think the hype is a little bit much. I agree. The first half of the year he was pretty bad. Like I watched a lot of those games. You look at his numbers.
He had some big plays early.
Yeah, big plays, right?
Him.
He was 18th.
He wasn't even throwing the ball that much. It was like low volume, like crazy big plays that he was making sometimes.
In the first half of the year, he's 18th in EPA, 25th in PFF grade and success rate. So he was living off those big plays, and they were getting into a lot. It was funny. They were getting in a lot of close games. And it was like, the old Phillip Rivers, hit the ball in his hands with the Chargers, down one score with a minute left and, marching down the field, and he would never be able to kind of complete it. And that's what Love was. I mean, they lost like 4 or 5 games, I recall, against the Raiders and the Steelers and the Broncos, where he had the ball in the last minute and, either committed a turnover or, just couldn't get it done on fourth down. And so, he wasn't, he was okay, but he wasn't really doing anything that would give you hope. And, halfway through the year, I mean, they were getting blown out by the Vikings when Cousins went down. And then all of a sudden, like, just everything clicked. I don't know how it happened, but it just clicked and he looked a lot better. But the team lost to Tommy DeVito late in the year on Monday Night Football. Okay. The team lost. They should have lost to Carolina. People forget, like, Carolina was, I think they were within like 2 points in the last couple of minutes of that game. They weren't blowing. They beat the Bears in the finale just to get in the playoffs by like 7 points. It wasn't like an impressive down the stretch. It was, everyone is just anchoring to those playoff wins. I mean, they look so good against Dallas, and they look so good against the Niners.
Well, Love is very aesthetically pleasing. I mean, he really does play like Aaron Rodgers. He does look like kind of look like Aaron Rodgers out there, and Aaron Rodgers has got to be one of the prettiest quarterbacks to watch as far as how he plays.
Yeah, so to me, I think I think he's good. I don't think he's great, but I think he's good. And I just think honestly, I think it's just kind of going to plateau from last season in terms of the team. I think this is just a 9-10 win team. Yeah. Could go either way. They could sneak into playoffs, they can get in, or they can miss it, and that wouldn't surprise me. I don't see them as a Super Bowl contender at all. I just don't envision that. I just think that there's a lot of, there's just a lot of things that I'm still a little queasy on. And so we're just putting everything into all of our eggs into like the last handful of games as a barometer for the entire season and what's going to happen this year. I just can't get there yet. But I like Love and I like LaFleur, so there's definitely positives there. But there's I just don't think it's an automatic uphill kind of ascension to a Super Bowl stardom at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think for Love, let's contrast him to someone like C.J. Stroud, who may be like another great 2023 quarterback. What could they do this year? I mean, what's something that doesn't necessarily roll in to my model enough is like I think the stability with the Texans and what they've added and everything, like it looks pretty good. You look at this roster on the Packers and you're like maybe they have an average-ish sort of offensive line and who knows what can happen. And their receivers are like, maybe these guys are better than we think, but maybe they all aren't that great. Also, like there's some potential. There's just there's some like train wreck potential in the surroundings, I think, for him, which may not be fully priced into what people are thinking, which wouldn't even be his fault. It's just like they don't have a lot of robustness and high end talent on that offense around him.
Yeah, I mean the offensive line is like you said, kind of it's not elite. It's fine. The receivers are all young. I mean, they didn't. I will say the positive is they didn't have Christian Watson really at all last year, and he's like their one big play threat. So but who knows?
What if he's just not good though? Like, what if he was just a fluke as a rookie? I think there's some potential of that, right?
Or, I mean, I think he's good. I think he's just a walking hamstring pull. I mean, honestly, it's like he's just always going to have that in his bag. Like he's never going to play a full 17-game season and be fully healthy. You can't really rely on him. So you might get spurts of him. But yeah, the receiving core is fine. They're young. Like, but is there a number one receiver there? Probably not. There's just a bunch of like 2s and 3s. And you've got decent tight end and Musgrave, who's got upside. Like I said, I think that Aaron Jones, you go from Aaron Jones to Josh Jacobs, who doesn't really add much in the passing game. He's just kind of a dump off guy. Aaron Jones was really versatile. And like I said, he ran for over 100
looked explosive yards last year still,
yeah.
Which is, he's getting up there. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jones had 6 straight 100-yard games to end the year. I thought he was very valuable. He had a great game against the Niners and against Dallas, in the playoffs. So, I thought he was very valuable. But to me, Jacobs is going to be washed. He has the worst efficiency amongst any running back with over, I think, 150 or 200 carries last year in the NFL. He's like 3.5 yards per carry. I can't believe they kind of swapped those guys out. Like, that didn't make any sense to me. You've got a plotter and AJ Dillon behind him. I actually think Marshawn Lloyd, who's an explosive rookie from USC, is kind of a sneaky, if you're looking, from a fantasy, maybe long shot rookie of the year perspective. He's a guy who I like from a Browns perspective when I was looking at the draft. He fumbles a lot, but he's got major explosive play potential. He's a guy who could, evolve, towards the end of the year and help out in that regard. But I just think, I just don't think they're as kind of penciling in as a top 5 offense like a lot of people are assuming, based on last year. So I don't know. Like I said, I think they're fine, but I just don't think it's just an automatic ascension into the Super Bowl like many think.
Yeah. I just don't have a high confidence level on a lot of the players around there. So hey, I just think it's a little bit troubling if every single player you're like, well, they have upside. Well, every player kind of has some upside, right? You want to have players where you're like, not only do they have upside, but I'm like pretty certain of how good this guy is. Yeah, the Jacobs thing is weird. I guess we shouldn't be talking about running backs so much because I
feel weird. But like I said, to me, the running backs that matter are the ones that create explosives and are good in the passing game. Like that's
what can't be replicated, right? Like I think there is something to that, like that where Josh Jacobs is a perfect running back if your passing game stinks and you just want to hand the ball off to someone who can grind out and not have an embarrassing final score. He was good in that sort of role. So I don't know if that also comports well with you want to have this dynamic quarterback that's gonna take another step this year.
Yeah, we'll see.
Let me see. Do I have anyone else that I really wanted to talk about? I don't think there's anyone else I really want to talk about.
Who's
any other teams that you want to?
Can I ask you? I mean, who's your Super Bowl team? Who do you think is obviously outside of the Chiefs and Niners, like who do you think is kind of Super Bowl worthy? I feel like the NFC is where you want to pick kind of out of nowhere team, not out of nowhere team, but maybe a team that isn't the usual. The AFC is just like until Mahomes leaves, like how do you pick against that team or even Baltimore or Houston? It's like to me, it's the NFC that is going to kind of rotate. What do you think? Do you think the Rams have any shot? They're another team I'm just not totally sure of.
I think the Rams they look good by my numbers. I don't know if they have a shot. I mean, I guess I don't know if I have anything super interesting to say as far as the Super Bowl is concerned, other than like I guess again, they didn't look the offense didn't look great in the Super Bowl itself, but I don't know. I just still think the 49ers are just
Yeah.
really good team. And I know that they had some bad ish sort of game against the Lions and then another not so great game, at least offensively, against the Chiefs. But I guess I just look at them versus all these other teams, especially in the NFC. And it's just like, I don't see how they don't just walk in. Well, whatever, anything can happen. But I just feel like they're in such a strong position to, get the number one seed and move forward this year. That I like them a lot. Presuming, they don't trade Ayuk or anything else that I don't think is going to end up happening.
And our guy, maybe Brandon Staley, who's like a defensive assistant or whatever it is, or maybe he'll rub off on our guy Shanahan, and he'll actually go for it on fourth down on occasion.
Well, what's interesting about maybe this year, Purdy, I do think he has some like make a play ability or whatever you want to call it that a lot of guys don't have. That I do think they can let them go a little bit more. And some bad things are going to happen sometimes, but I think it would be good for the offense for them to do it. Whereas you wouldn't necessarily say the same thing with Jimmy G or a type of quarterback like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think there's just so much talent there. By the way, their backup is Josh Dobbs, which is, I thought that was a really strange signing. I thought Darnold made sense. It's kind of like, all right, you got a good arm and, you could probably run that off. Dobbs, like, I don't know. It's kind of a strange, in case you needed, some starts, he's not a guy that is going to kind of throw it over the middle like that offense. He's going to get it to the weapons. Kind of an odd one, but anyway.
Yeah, who knows? They might have to end up picking up someone else. I mean, obviously Darnold would want to leave even for less money to have a chance to start somewhere else. So that's right. So I think they're interesting. I mean, you mentioned Philly. I guess I kind of like, because the AFC is tough, but I guess I kind of like Cincinnati. But I don't know, man. It's tough to tell. Even with the Bengals this year, I feel like they're a little bit under the radar. And I'm normally not a big fan of the Bengals because they would have these playoff runs and then people would be like, who's better, Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or whatever. And at least we're not hearing any of that this season. So I think there's some potential for them offensively to step forward.
They get a last place schedule too. That helps. Yeah, I mean, if you look at their schedule, it's pretty. I mean, look at their early games. They play they got the Chiefs a week too, but they have the Patriots, Washington, Carolina, the Giants, all in the first 6 weeks. It's like they could rack up a bunch, and that's usually when Burrow struggles is early on. So if they can,
what I think is good for them is, number one, I guess we'll see with Kansas City what happens, but I'm not fully willing to say the Kansas City and Mahomes we saw in the playoffs is just going to roll forward to this year versus the Kansas City that we saw during the regular season, which was a struggle. They were struggling. I know they got Xavier Worthy and some other guys, but I just think there's some potential for KC, maybe not to be that good. There's some potential for Buffalo. Talk about a supporting cast around Josh Allen that, I don't know what the downside is necessarily there. So if those teams start to struggle, maybe Cincinnati could have an easier path out of the AFC than some may be projecting at this point.
Yeah. I think that there's been some sharp action on the Bengals to win the AFC North just because of that schedule and just the losses we talked about with Baltimore. So I think that's kind of baked into their win total. But their defense is pretty bad. Their defense was really bad last year, and they caught some breaks. They were really good in the red zone. I think they had one of the better turnover rates in the red zone. Like, they could have been a lot worse. And I don't know if they solved any of those issues. So they're going to need that offense to put up a lot of points. And we'll see. I don't know what they're going to do with T. Higgins too. So like some of those, there's a lot of like contract kind of question marks like you don't see very often. I don't know how many will enter the season, but between the Cowboys with Dak and CeeDee Lamb, and then this one with Higgins, there's some big name players that you're just kind of playing in their final years without insurance going forward. And again, I hate to say it because you don't want to ever talk about these professional athletes not giving it their all, but like, all right, like you got to pull hamstring or you tweak something. Are you really going to push it in your contract year? Like, that stuff matters on the fringes. So, that stuff could impact the team, in the locker room as well. I don't know. I don't know how to quantify that stuff, but there's a lot more than I'm normally seeing. So,
I think, like, guys can't really talk themselves into trades where some people may think. And this year in particular, we didn't have like good receiver on a bad team who was maybe willing to leave and then re-sign a new contract on a low cap hit for a better team that he could go to. These guys are like on teams like when your Ayuks and your Higgins that want them for one more year. I mean, these are like big years. When it comes to Burrow's contract, like this is a big year for a low cap hit for him, and they want to shove in as much talent as possible this year to try and win something. You're right about the defense. I guess defense is always one of those things where you never know. Sometimes in the offseason, they just sprinkle some magic dust on these guys who we think stink, and they end up being an okay defense for some reason. So we'll end up seeing there. Any talk as far as maybe MVP futures, things like that? I don't know if you want to reveal any of your stuff there. But anything you're looking at there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, it's important. I mean, the market's caught up to all this. It's not like I've been tweeting about it for years and people have been talking about it, but it's like, all right, don't even look. You could really filter down the number of highly probable candidates to like 10 every single year. It's just, quarterbacks on a team that can win at least 11 games and have a win total of at least 8.5. It's like, if you just do that and you kind of look closer to the guys that have, won it before, plus some of the young guns, that's really your list. There's not a lot of case. I mean, we should talk about this. Like I'm hearing a ton of Jared Goff as like a sleeper. And it makes me laugh because I just don't get it, because the guy was second in yards. I think he was second in yards and fourth in TDs last year. Like he had a great year on a team that won 12 games, and he didn't even get a vote. Like no one even sniffed. He didn't even sniff a vote, let alone even being contention.
Yeah.
Like,
I think there have been situations in the past where you'd have like a Matt Ryan jump out and not out of nowhere, but like you wouldn't necessarily put him in like the perennial MVP conversation, but like. You have to like Matt Ryan might be like the kind of the lowest like perception of how good of a quarterback you are. And Matt Ryan's like a borderline Hall of Famer. Like Jared Goff, I'm sorry, is not a borderline Hall of Famer. So like he doesn't even make it close to that sort of level,
No, I mean, and people never called Matt Ryan a system quarterback. Like he was a good quarterback that just didn't have great talent around him. We got Julio Jones and obviously Shanahan. So he was never really that system guy, like looked down upon. And a guy like Goff doesn't have any respect. That's the thing. Like this is a award voted by humans who have biases, and the same thing with Tua, most likely. Like if you don't have respect around the league, you look at Purdy last year. He had unworldly numbers. He had the highest yards per attempt of like any quarterback in NFL history. 3/4 of the way in the season, and just it was the best offense we've seen in years, highest EPA, and like he was barely like people were just like begrudgingly putting him as like a top candidate. So I don't know, the Jared Goff thing, especially at the price. Like if he was like 70-1, 60-1, okay, I can understand maybe that there's some value, but he's like 30-1 and people are recommending him. I think it's really, it really comes down to a guy like, to me, it's like Josh Allen, it's CJ Stroud, it's, Jalen Hurts. Like I think Hurts has got some value. He's around 15-1 in that group. I think Allen is interesting, though. You'd have to think that Buffalo is going to have to win like 13 games for him to do that, which is possible. But, so I think Hurts is interesting. There's not a lot of value. The market's caught up. They know this. I mean, Anthony Richardson would be kind of your quote unquote sexy long shot. And I talked about him a couple of months ago, and everyone's talked about him. He's like 35-1. And it's like back like 5 years ago, he would have been 70-1. He would have been 80-1. But after we see Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in their second years kind of rise up and win it, and we see kind of the characteristics of the type of quarterback that wins it, all that value is kind of out of him. So really, doesn't make a lot of sense to take, put money on MVP right now. I think in season, you could probably find better value because that market shifts a lot in season. I mean, we saw last year, it was like, it went from like Mahomes to Dak to Purdy to Lamar. Like the torch kept getting passed throughout the year. So you could find some value in that market from MVP. So, like I said, if you're going to do it, like focus on quarterbacks, focus on teams that you think have a good shot to win 11 plus games. Typically you don't get like a first time we talk about Goff, like Matt Ryan's the outlier, maybe like a Rich Gannon years ago. But guys that are, around 30 plus that have never won it before, it's like hard for those guys to step up because of the perception of, they have never really done it before. They're not in that elite class, so it's hard. So it's kind of stick to your younger guys who, could win 12 plus games. And, that's probably the pool you want to swim in from an MVP standpoint.
Yeah. I think Hertz was the one when you had mentioned a couple of months ago about MVP stuff. It was the guy that jumped out to me because at least he checked that box. Like we have literal evidence from 2 years ago that people are willing to say he's MVP worthy. I mean, he didn't win the MVP, but he got plenty of votes, more votes than Jared Goff is ever going to get, right? For
Yeah.
MVP, despite having the offensive surroundings on him. I mean, I might be slightly interested to see what will happen with Brock Purdy this year. Like, is there some chance of a capitulation of for like perception on Brock Purdy if he just comes out and like destroys again this year? I don't know. Maybe. It's just he's not in the golf bucket at least, right? Like he's not in the golf bucket where it's like
No.
that's not going to happen. So maybe there's something there, but like you're saying, it's probably better just to wait around and wait to see, if Purdue does continue to be that good this year. Since again, he's a guy where if you were just going to straight up project who's going to be the most efficient quarterback this year, he would probably be, right there with anyone else. And yet he's sitting, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like eighth, in
Yeah.
the in MVP odds sort of thing. So, maybe there's a capitulation there. I'm not sure if it'll ever happen with him, but at least there's some possibility.
Yeah, you almost have to hope that if McCaffrey goes down for a few games and he kind of carries them to show that he can do
about
it.
McCaffrey. I forget about the McCaffrey factor. Oh God, yeah, it is weird that like having a running back is worse for splitting the vote than having a great receiver, which you think it
Yeah.
shouldn't be that way, but like having AJ Brown and Devontae Smith didn't split the vote for Jalen Hurts, but yet having Christian McCaffrey will split the vote for a quarterback. It's
Yeah, it's pretty much turned the offensive player of the year category is like the best non-quarterback, and the MVP is just the quarterback. It's just kind of how it is. It's like, and that's how everyone's going to vote for until unless we get some crazy outlier year. But if McCaffrey wasn't going to win it last year, there's just like no way it's going to be a non-quarterback at this point.
Yeah, I think the quarterback talent is like too deep for everyone to have a bad year at the same time. And we had some dark years there for a while, and we still didn't see it. We still didn't see it post Adrian Peterson. So I think there's just like you need too many quarterbacks would have to have a bad year, and we almost got that last year, right? We almost got enough quarterbacks who are really having a bad year. So it's going to be tough, I think, to happen this year. All right, man. This is awesome. Yeah. I'm glad you're able to join me. Let me plug again to not only follow you on Twitter at Clevta, so CLEVTA, but then also go to the website cleveanalytics.com. Check out the free preview, all this stuff. It's all linked in the show notes. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, I'm glad you didn't bring up my Browns. I think that was
I forgot to do that. Yeah, who knows what the hell's going on? Well, I'll say one thing about the Browns. I thought they were going to be outperformed last year, and then like none of my reasoning was actually correct. other than the explosives wouldn't go against them, but other than that, like I don't know how the hell that happened.
Yeah, I was the same boat as you, but I did say I thought Schwartz in that defense would be better. I mean, Joe Woods as a defensive.
Well, not giving up the third downs, not being like so bad on third down and explosives. Yeah.
That's kind of how I see Philly this year. Not to that, not totally going to flip, but you just don't need, you just need a little bit of improvement there. And it's obviously the money down. I think with the Browns, I do think there's a high floor. I mean, we saw all those quarterbacks, 4 quarterbacks.
I mean, is Watson done? Are we done with Deshaun Watson at this point? And then, obviously there's no such thing as being done or not, but let's that's the way we frame things in these discussions.
What's interesting is they have not restructured his deal. Which they had done the last 2 years, and it was kind of a foregone conclusion they'd do it again. And maybe look, you still got to have a handful of weeks before the season starts, so it could happen. But that's interesting that they've kind of waited this long. And again, I'm not a cap expert at all, so maybe it doesn't mean anything. But if they're going to eventually, if it is a complete failure and they did want to move on, you'd have to eat money. It would just be a little bit less than maybe if you restructure it. I'm not sure down the road, but. It's interesting that they haven't done anything there yet. Maybe they want to see how his shoulder responds in camp. I don't know. I mean, so far it seems like he's throwing the ball okay. They've added Jerry Jeudy, who brings a level of explosiveness after the catch that they didn't have at all. As good as Amari Cooper is, he's not a guy you throw a 10-yard slant and he goes 80 yards, which Jeudy can actually do. He's top 10 in yards after the catch per reception. So he does add that element. So I do like that. They've got a really good offensive line. I think Stefanski has proven he's a smart play caller and, positive EV decisions. So those things are going to add up, and you're going to, hopefully, win a lot of those close games again with some of that going for it on fourth down and going for 2 in the right spot. Yeah, but with Watson, I don't know. I mean, talk about a range of outcomes. Is there any quarterback in the NFL with a wider range than him? I mean, he could eventually be another, you could have another season where he's top 6 to 8 in the NFL like he was with Houston, or he can be in the 20s like he was, the last 2 years. It could be anything.
I agree with you, although I think the well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just the people who I listen to, but I think there seems to be a stronger contingent of the opinion that really doesn't give him any chance of jumping back there again. And I mean, the problem is even when I have my numbers, like when I'm going to put together my quarterback numbers going into this year, I'm going to look at Deshaun Watson and be like, oh my God, why is this guy like so high still after being bad for multiple years? But the thing is, when you build up like that strong of a track record, just historically, we have seen quarterbacks. I mean, maybe Aaron Rodgers was one of them, right? Have like multi-year blah sort of play, but if they've displayed the high level before, like there's at least a possibility that it comes back better so than quarterbacks who never had that high level at any point in time.
Yeah, and to be fair, he did. I mean, he had one of his best games before he got hurt. I mean, I think he went 16 of 16 against the Ravens in the second half on the road with a broken shoulder, and they came back and won. Now, a lot of those were dump offs, but he made plays with his legs, and I mean, that's a tough defense to go up against. He had a 78 grade against Arizona the prior week. So, I mean, against Tennessee in week 3 at a 74 grade was, almost completed 82% of his passes, 9 yards per attempt. Like, he did show glimpses last year. It just wasn't totally consistent. So, I would have liked to have seen, what would have happened after that Baltimore game because, he did play the best he had all season. So, I don't know. He's shown glimpses. It's not like it's been a complete zero. He just hasn't put it together consistently. And, they brought in Ken Dorsey from Buffalo to be the new OC. I think they want to go way more spread. They want, they know that Dorsey had success with Cam Newton and obviously Josh Allen in that similar scheme, a lot of RPO, kind of, using a lot of the same types of, spread three wide receiver sets that they weren't using as much in Cleveland the last couple of years. So they're going to cater the offense towards him, and they added a weapon in Judy, and we'll see. He's going to have everything he needs. So I think it's going to be, it's a positive with the new OC, but if his shoulder isn't healthy, then it's not going to matter at the end of the day. And who knows if he's going to run as much with that shoulder. So, there's a lot of question marks. I think of any quarterback in the NFL, he has the widest range of outcomes. And, we haven't seen many, like you said, there hasn't been many quarterbacks who have had a top 10 pedigree for a number of years just fall off a cliff that early like him. I mean, Dante Culpepper is probably the only one I could think of in the last 30 years that kind of had that. So, I think that there's enough track record there that, he does have potential for that upside. So I don't know. It's hard to, there's no way you can be confident either way, in my opinion, that he's going to be great or he's going to be terrible.
The only thing I'll say about him is as part of the, negotiating and pricing and, when people were trying to sign him is that he probably benefited a little bit too much. His perception benefited a little bit too much from this way that we view injury proneness in this binary nature, where if someone's coming off of an injury, it's like, oh, stay away. You can't touch them. And even if they've had 5 injuries that were pretty severe in the past, but they didn't this last season, then you're like, oh, well, we're not even going to think about injuries. I mean, obviously he has a very significant injury history. So that was something where it's probably just endemic to how he plays, and I don't know if he's going to be able to get out of having that risk for the rest of his career, really.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that if you're looking at kind of Cleveland as a playoff team or whatever you want to look at, I mean, Jameis Winston as a backup, you could do worse with it than have him. He's kind of like Joe Flacco, like a young Joe Flacco,
yeah,
with a little more upside. That's what, because they did push the ball downfield a lot with Flacco. That's the one thing he gave them that they didn't have at any other point of the season, and he was completing a lot of those deep balls. I mean, he threw a lot of interception worthy plays. Some went back for 6, others were dropped, so he got away with it. And then he had two pick sixes in Houston in the playoff game. But he was he did take those chances, which I think that they wanted to see. They wanted to to push the ball down the field for those upside explosives. And so, I mean, I think Jameis can do that. If he had to play 8 games, 10 games, like I said, you could do worse than him. at quarterback. He's probably one of the top 30 quarterbacks in the NFL, maybe top 25. I don't know. He's probably in that range. So, it is, you do have that as a fallback. And if your defense plays, anywhere near, they're not going to be number 1 or 2 like last year. This defense is so volatile, but they bring everybody back and they have a good DC. And you've got, elite players in Myles Garrett and, really good player in Zadarius Smith, et cetera. So, and you've got a really good quarterback room. Like there's no reason to think this won't be a kind of a top 8 to 10 defense. And you just need some level of offense. I mean, they were one of the worst drop back per EPA teams in the NFL last year, and they still won 11 games. And that they had the highest EPA loss due to turnovers on offense. Like this was a bad offense, and they still were able to manage a playoff game. And, and so I think there is that level of floor here because of that. There's, hopefully some positive regression, and hopefully the offense is good enough to make up for some of that probably regression on defense.
Yeah. And I guess if you look at some other similarly ranked teams, when at least comes to some of the betting markets now, they're kind of sandwiched in with teams who realistically have no real shot of being a top-notch team, whereas they, whatever, they have a path at least to get there versus
are they like in the Rams Dolphins category for you? Is that kind of in that Rams Dolphins?
I mean, I'd put them below the Rams Dolphins category, but then again, the market, like if you're looking at them as to where their betting ranks, at least according to the numbers that I put together, they're like, sandwiched between the Saints and the Bears or something like that in that sort of area for how good they are. Whereas the Dolphins are scraping into the top 10 and something like that. So they're just viewed in a different category as the other teams where, there's some path to them getting there in a tough AFC. Don't get me wrong, in a tough AFC North, that's probably problematic for them, but it's not like they're a Seahawks or something like that, where I just don't think there's any realistic chance of them making a deep run.
Yeah, it should be interesting. The AFC is just loaded. I feel like it's like Groundhog Day with the same top teams, and but and that's what makes this so tough is they traded so much for him, giving the contract, obviously all the off the field issues, and you need them to beat Patrick Mahomes. That's what you did that for. And even if they win 12 games and get a 4 seed or something and lose in the second round, it's just a failure from that perspective, especially with the roster and the cap situation they have. So, but anyway, glad you didn't ask me about it.
Well, not that we didn't just talk about them for 15 minutes. That's okay. So it'll be a year. It'll be a year. Let me tell you. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. That whether Watson plays well or plays poorly, there'll be a lot of attention on there, which is interesting for the fact that I feel like Stefanski and I guess a lot of GMs aren't necessarily showy type of personalities, but Andrew Berry are both very like low key sort of thing. Yet there's always going to be a lot of talk about that. Anyway, man, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll be back live streaming next Tuesday at 1 p.m. with Hermsmeyer. Go over some more power ranking stuff. He'll tell me which teams that he thinks have no chance to win, and I'll say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. The normal sort of stuff with us. Until then, thanks for everyone tuning in, and I'll be talking at you then. Thanks.